welcome to Impact, the programme where we take a look at topics and issues that are impacting us, but also how we can impact others with the gospel. And the topic that we are going to be talking about on today's programme is overcoming the stigma of leprosy. And right at the beginning of the programme, I am going to say that we may show videos and photos throughout the programme that some viewers may find upsetting and distressing, so just be aware of that. But leprosy is something that is known from the Bible. It might be something that you've heard about but don't really know much about. And today's programme is going to be really about making awareness of what leprosy is and what we can do about it. Because every 2 minutes, someone is diagnosed with leprosy. That's more than 200,000 new cases a year. Although it is curable, millions of people worldwide are living with the effects of the disease. From physical disability to mental health problems, poverty and discrimination. Joining us on today's Impact to give us a deeper insight and understanding into leprosy and its effects is Peter Waddup, who is the CEO of the Leprosy Mission. So Peter, welcome to Impact.
Nikki, thank you very much for allowing me to join you on the show today.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here with us. And as I said in the introduction, I think it's important for us to gain an understanding of leprosy because we might have heard of it, but not really know much about it. So thank you so much for being on the programme. So do just give us a bit of an insight and a brief introduction of what it is that the Leprosy Mission do.
Okay, so the Leprosy Mission is made up of 31 countries, but the Leprosy Mission country that I work for, which is England and Wales, supports work in 10 countries across Asia and Africa, raising the funds to run hospitals. Well, there's 14 hospitals in India, for instance, vocational training colleges for youngsters from families affected by leprosy that otherwise wouldn't receive an education elsewhere. Many field projects teaching self-care, advocacy work, even at national government level, to ensure that governments take this disease seriously. Some would like to think that leprosy doesn't even exist in their own countries, but we know that very much it does. So advocating at government level, even within our own country, to ensure that we bear our responsibility for this global burden. So we do as much as we can to educate and to combat the effects of this disease, but we like to think that we take it much further than that and provide holistic healing to the people that we reach out to.
Definitely, it sounds like a very special work that you are doing, and we're going to go into more detail about that as the programme goes on. But Peter, when I have a guest here on Impact, I like to kind of rewind time for them and kind of get an insight of what their life was like growing up. So do tell us a little bit about yourself. Where was you born? What was life like growing up? And what was family life like for you?
Yeah, so I was born in a town called Northampton in England, and that town is famous for shoemaking. That's why the local sports team is called the Cobblers, after the shoemaking industry. My parents divorced at quite a young age for me. I was probably about 7 or 8 years old. So that was a bit of a shock to me, as it is to any child. Father left the house, so my mum really struggled to bring myself and my sister up. And I'm very thankful to the sacrificial life my mother lived, retraining so that she could earn enough money to support my sister and I. So, and actually, it was in my childhood that I first experienced, even though I didn't know God at that age, that was when I first experienced what I now know to be God's voice. And I feel, looking back, that he spoke very powerfully into my life, and I didn't know just what an effect that would have, what impact that would have on me decades later.
Incredible. And we are going to go into that story a little bit later on because it's kind of the foundational basis of what you are doing now. So it's really exciting that God, even back then, even before you kind of had that relationship or even belief in him, was speaking to you and speaking into your life. So thank you for sharing that with us. And I do just want to touch on a little bit more, if you don't mind, about the divorce, especially in such a young age, because I think so many people sadly can kind of relate to that story and can kind of struggle when you've kind of got a unit as a family and then that kind of falls apart a little bit. How did that make you feel emotionally and I would say spiritually, but you didn't really have God as such then in your life, did you? So what kind of ways did it affect you?
No, yeah, I mean, going back to my childhood, I do remember praying as a child, but I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what I was doing, and I've always been searching for faith, and I've been let down actually, even within churches as I grew up, as I continued to search. But I remember in my primary school, so at a very young age, there was a young girl in my class who was really naughty. I mean, very naughty, and she was always the one that was being sent to the corner of the room, etc. And I just didn't know, couldn't understand why she was the way that she was. And I remember someone saying to me once, "Oh, her parents are divorced." Um, about a year later, my mum and my dad sat me down and told me that they were going to get divorced. And I remember thinking, "Oh, I'm going to be naughty now. I'm going to be just like that girl in the class, because that's what happens." I connected the two. Of course, that's not the case. But it is difficult, actually, as a child, as a very young child, seeing your mum in tears, seeing your mum distressed, feeling like that she's failing as a parent, which she absolutely wasn't, and actually having to grow up very quickly. So, as a very young boy, wanting to try and fill in for the role of your father who's no longer there, and to try and support your mother and your younger sister. So that I felt that responsibility at a young age, which was really difficult. I would say that at that point I was going to good schools, but a bit later on in my childhood, my mum remarried. I changed schools, and I can honestly say that at that point, my education finished. I went to a new school, and I sensed almost on day one that it wasn't a place where I was going to continue what had up to that point had been a good education. I felt really resentful of that, even many years later as I look back. Having forged out a successful career, I left school with no qualifications. Later on, when I did, through my own time and effort and funding, I went and got professional qualifications. I wanted to go back to the school actually and wave these certificates into the faces of the teachers and say, "Look, you see, it wasn't me, it was you." So there was a bit of resentment at that time for what I felt that I'd lost. And obviously I had a mum that felt guilty because she'd taken me away from that good school, and not realizing what was, the consequences of that. And so that felt like a burden for her as well, which of course comes back on the children when you know that you feel you might have let your parent down in a way. Then you take that guilt on as well, don't you? So, but I was always loved, as I said at the start. I always felt loved unconditionally by my mum, and I think that can really cover so many things, so many issues. I was bullied as well. I was quite a chubby lad at school. And so I was, particularly when I changed schools, I was a sitting target for the bullies in the playground. And I wanted to keep that from my mum as well. I didn't want her to know that that was happening at school. So, yeah, good and bad times.
It sounds like you had a lot going on in your childhood, but it's really good to see that you didn't let your failing education kind of dictate your path. You actually took that motivation to think, no, I want to do more with my life. And you talk about you had a successful career and stuff, and of course the amazing work that you're doing now. And again, you can just see that God had his hand on you, that it goes to show no matter what kind of happens in our past, whatever happens in our childhood, that doesn't have to dictate what path we take down. Of course, bad things happen, trials, tribulations and challenges happen, but there's nothing that God can't turn around from bad into good and for his glory. So it's incredible to see the background that you've had, but now the wonderful work that you're doing. And with the bullying as well, I'm sure a bit later on in the programme, and maybe in the second programme we're going to do, because this is a two-part programme, where we talk about how a lot of people with leprosy get bullied. And I think you having that experience is really good for us to know at this foundational level, to know that you can really relate with them people. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you that we're going to get onto that a bit later. But of course you are now a Christian. So what happened from that time where you were just praying and you didn't really know what you were doing, to then going through all this stuff that you've been through as a child and a young person? How did you then get to the point where you met Jesus Christ?
Okay, so can I go back to my childhood and
Yeah.
just share a story? So, there's this golden hour for children. You come home from school, and before the news comes on around 6 o'clock, there's children's programs, and it's a great tool for parents, isn't it, to plonk your child in front of the TV and not have to worry about them for a while. And that's what I was doing on this particular day. I couldn't tell you exactly what age I was, maybe 5, 6, 7. I really can't remember the age, but the age isn't so important. But I suddenly found myself watching the news. My mum had left me there a bit longer than she intended, and I was watching the news story of a famine in Africa. And there was babies on the screen with flies in their eyes, distended stomachs, and the reporter was saying that children as young as 1 years old are dying in this camp every day. And this tragedy was unfolding in front of the whole world, actually. But for me, it was a very, very personal encounter with the brokenness of this world. And I did hear a voice. It was in my heart, And I felt that, and I now look back and think this must have been God. God said to me, "You are going to be part of this world. You are going to be part of this kind of work one day. I will lead you into that." And it never left me. That thought was always with me whenever, even when my career took me a million miles away from the third sector, a million miles away from problems in Africa and Asia, into the corporate world. I still sensed that somehow I was going to find my way to a completely different career. I remember Bob Geldof, in my 20s, shouting down the screen, "Give us your money," for Live Aid, and I remember that thought hitting my mind again. One day, Peter, one day you're going to be involved. So there was that seed that had been planted at a very young age. So jump forward to about probably 2005, about 18 years ago. Two friends, a couple who I knew well. All of our children used to play together, and we'd started to become close friends. And we were planning to do something on a Wednesday evening, and they said, "Oh, we can't join you on Wednesday. We're starting another Alpha course." And I said, "Oh, what's an Alpha course?" And of course, they explained exactly what they've done. They've run many Alpha courses over the years. I didn't even know they were Christian. They were quite private about it at that point. And myself, my wife, and a couple of other couples that were part of this friendship group decided that we would go and join this Alpha course. And I went along, and on about week 5, I saw a friend of mine take that leap of faith, and I saw the change in their life. And I suddenly thought, rather than be the ones asking all of the awkward questions, and I certainly was that person. I'm sure my good friends running the Alpha course were thinking, "What have we done, accepting Peter onto this Alpha course?" I turned it round and I thought, hold on, I'm seeing something in someone else on this Alpha course, and I'm going to take that leap of faith. I'm going to make that decision to accept Jesus into my life. I'm going to ignore all of the barriers that I've put up, all of the lies that have been fed to me in the past, and I'm going to take that leap of faith. And it literally was a life-changing decision. Almost immediately, I had a call from a recruitment agency that I'd not even been speaking to tell me that I'd got an interview at World Vision. And I said, "Well, why have you got me an interview? I'm not looking for a job." And they said, "Really?" They'd managed to find my CV in a drawer. It must have been there for 6 or 7 years because I hadn't been looking for a job for many, many years. I ended up going for that interview. I had 3 interviews. I went before the board of directors and gave a presentation. I was encouraged by the HR director afterwards in terms of good feedback on, and I'm sure we'll be in touch really soon. And then I didn't get the job. Now, you might think that's a bit of a non-event, but it's not, because I believe that was God. Like within 3 or 4 days of me becoming a Christian, God was giving me a wake-up call saying, "We've got some catching up to do, Peter. I have showed you a new world, and that new world is waiting for you. So believe in me, and I will get you to where I intend you to be." And then over the next few years, doors just kept opening. And I did jump in with both feet. Within a year, I've been asked to be a deacon at our local church. A few years later, I'd been asked to become an elder. I got heavily involved in the leadership of the church. And it was through my church that I started to learn about the work of the Leprosy Mission, which I can talk about, when you want me to do that.
Wow, yeah, that's an incredible testimony. Thank you for sharing that. And I think I've had quite a few different guests on Impact talk about the Alpha course as well and the impact that it's had on them. And I think it's funny how you talk about the one asking the questions, but I think that's what the Alpha course is all about. It's all about asking them questions, all them things you've always wondered, and having a safe space to do that. So it's been really encouraging that your life changed at the Alpha course, and how God literally was opening them doors straight away. And I understand that. I think some people, God gives them an opportunity or a door opens and then suddenly it closes in their face and they're a bit confused. They're like, God, I thought this was from you. Why is now that opportunity closed? Why have I been rejected from that or whatever? But I think God does that sometimes because he guides us into the things that he wants to have for us. And he gives us little glimpses of what he has for us and the things that he can do. And if we just trust in him, that he will do those things. So I think it's exciting that he showed you that open door, but he said, this isn't what I'm leading you to as such, but he was just giving you a glimpse of what it is that he was going to do in your life. And that's really incredible. But one thing I want to pick up on is you said that when you was in the Alpha course and you took that step of faith, you had some barriers up that you had to take down. What were them barriers and why were they up?
Yeah, so I feel like I'd been pushed away through church earlier in life. So I left. I mentioned earlier that I didn't get any qualifications at school. I left school at age 16 and I moved south down to Surrey because at the time, which was 1980, there was a big recession. There was high unemployment rates, and I've been told that near Gatwick Airport there were jobs. So I actually left home I thought, I've got no qualifications. I just need to go where the jobs are. I can't expect a job to come to me. And so I moved down south. My father was living there at the time. I managed to stay with my father for a few months, but within a couple of months, the same thing happened. My father decided to move again, and so I was pretty much homeless. But luckily, I managed to get a bed sit, and I lived in bed sits for quite a few years then. And it was a bit of a lonely existence. I'd got a job for an insurance company, but evenings, when you're stuck in one room and one room only, and you're staring at the walls, and you don't really know anyone, it can be a bit soul destroying. So I ventured out. I started going to a Sunday night youth group at a local church down in Surrey. But I remember going to the Sunday service and just feeling like no one wanted to speak to me. I felt really isolated, sat at the back of the church on my own. So that was the first time I was rejected. And the second time, a few years later, when I met my wife to be, we thought about getting married. We went to visit the local church and asked if they would marry us, and they said yes. And we started to go on a Sunday. We were hearing the bands being read out, and then we were asked about our address, ready to fill in all the paperwork for the upcoming marriage. And we explained that we were renting, and the rental agreement runs out soon, so we might need to move to a different address. And the vicar at the time said, "Well, if you don't live in our parish, then we won't be marrying you because you're not regular churchgoers." He completely missed the fact that we'd been going actually for about 4 or 5 weeks. And yet again, we had to postpone the wedding as a result because we couldn't guarantee where we'd be living. And yet again, I felt rejected by church. And so I walked away from it. I thought I thought I was looking for something that I thought is special, but it doesn't feel very special at the moment. I feel quite rejected by it. So I think it's important to understand that the church can have a big role, not just in bringing people to Jesus, but actually turning people away. We had to get this right. We have to be welcoming to everyone who walks through the door. When people walk through a church door for the first time, they are searching. In Ecclesiastes, it says that God puts eternity on our hearts, and I believe everyone has eternity on their hearts. Some people will look in the wrong places to fulfill that destiny. We as Christians open our arms and are welcoming to every single person that wants to learn more about Jesus.
Man, it's sad to hear that you had that experience, and sadly I think it does happen quite often to people. I think they turn their back on Jesus and turn their back on Christianity and following that walk because of how people have treated them in church. And the Bible talks about that Jesus said that he came for the sick, not for the people that were well. And I think a lot of the time he was radical in his time. He came and hung out with the sinners, he hung out with the tax collectors, he hung out with prostitutes and all these people. And the Pharisees, the high people at the time, was looking at him like, what are you doing? You're supposed to be a holy man. You're supposed to be like hanging out with us type thing. But Jesus came for those who need saviour, who need help. And we're all sinners at the end of the day. And every single person that walks into that church, even if you've been a regular goer for years in that church, you are still a sinner that has been saved by grace and by love. And I think we all need reminding of that sometimes, not to be so pompous. Yes. And we see someone who's walking in from the street and is not how we think they should be. Jesus would be welcoming them into his friendship group with open arms. And I think that's exactly what we need to be doing. And I think you're right, we need to be more welcoming as a church and as a Christian body. So what kind of advice and tips would you give on how we can do that?
Yeah, well, so first of all, I mean, just thinking back to the Alpha course, what are some of the hurdles I needed to get over? I think there are certain words that we use that are not understood by non-Christians, and the biggest one is sin. Sin was a word to me that felt really horrible. If someone's ever told me that I was a sinner before I was a Christian, then I would feel deeply insulted by it. But the Alpha course has guided me through that. That we're all broken. None of us are perfect. We make mistakes, but that God understands that, and God has given us a way out. And I think sometimes we approach that in the wrong way. We stress the non-Christians too much about, you're broken people. Goodness, the lesson that I've learned as a Christian is that I'm more broken than I ever thought I was before I was a Christian, but I can accept that and know that God understands that and know that God loves me. So ultimately what we need to understand is that we are loved unconditionally by God. He has given us the answer. Jesus went to the cross. He takes our sins as far away as the east is from the west. And frees us up from all that weighs us down, and that doesn't mean that we're getting it right now. I think that's really important as Christians as well. We need to acknowledge that we still make those mistakes. Yeah, because because I don't think that always happens. The other, the Holy Spirit, the Alpha course beautifully talks about what the Holy Spirit is to us. It's a gift. Jesus ascended to the heavens, and the Holy Spirit is here to equip us, to support us in everything that we do. But I think as a non-Christian, hearing about a Holy Spirit, that can be a bit off-putting as well. That can be quite daunting, can't it? So I think we have to be really gentle in how we introduce the more complex areas of the Christian faith, and it's not complex. I always come back to when Jesus was asked, "What are the greatest commandments?" And he said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, and your soul." And the second is like this: love your neighbor as yourself. And then he said, "And all of the laws and all of the prophets hang off these two commandments." Basically saying, if you haven't got time to read the Bible, just focus on those two commandments, because everything is wrapped up in loving the Lord your God and loving your neighbor as yourself. And if we can embrace that we are loved and that we are to return that love by loving Jesus and loving everyone else, it simplifies what can sometimes feel a complex and off-putting message.
Definitely, and loving your neighbour is something that you do wholeheartedly at the Leprosy Mission, not physical neighbours, but the ones that are around the world and looking after them. So let's go back to your testimony. You talked about how God kind of led you to World Vision, but then he closed that door. So how did you end up working for the Leprosy Mission?
Yeah, so I was attending a local Baptist church. That doesn't mean I'm a Baptist. It just means that the lovely couple that brought us into their home for the Alpha course, they were currently attending the Baptist church at that time, and at the end of the course they said, well, would you like to come with us next Sunday? And I walked into a church and it just felt like family. By the way, I came across leprosy in the 90s. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, at some point. And I'd never forgotten this community of people affected by leprosy that I'd seen in India. And into my church walked a very tall Northern Irish gentleman called Rupert. Rupert had moved to my town, having just taken on the role of the CEO of the Leprosy Mission, England and Wales. And I just felt that tap on my shoulder. I just felt God saying, "This is it. This is your moment. Go and speak to Rupert." And I did. Not just once, but every Sunday I would be waiting for Rupert to finish another conversation with someone else so that I could ask him more about the work of the Leprosy Mission. This went on for quite a few months, and then Rupert said to me, "Look, Peter, we need a volunteer on the board. We need an accountant. You're a qualified accountant. Would you like to come and visit the office and explore whether that might be a role that you'd be interested in?" So I did just that. I visited the office. I had a long conversation with him. And within a couple of months, I'd applied for this voluntary role and been accepted as a trustee of the Leprosy Mission, England and Wales. And I must admit, I was thinking at the time, well, that's what God was talking to me about. That's, even when I was a young boy, I'm now involved in this kind of work. Even at that time, I didn't know that the doors were going to keep on opening, which they did. Shall I carry on the story at this point in terms of the next step?
Yeah, dude, is it about how you become, because you're now CEO, aren't you, of Leprosy Mission? So it's incredible
Yes,
how you
yeah.
went from volunteer to there. So yeah, do tell us how.
Absolutely. So what happened then was I've been on the board of trustees for a couple of years, and Rupert asked if I'd be prepared to be the treasurer. And this is quite a tragic story now. I visited the offices in August 2010. It was the Friday before a bank holiday weekend. I signed the papers to become the treasurer. I had a chat with Rupert. He was always traveling. He was a French speaker. He was very often in the Congo, where we had some projects at the time. And I said, "Are you going traveling this weekend?" And he said, "I'm going home this weekend to Northern Ireland, going camping with my family. It's my birthday. I'm really looking forward to spending some quality time with my family." And I said, "Well, have a great time, Rupert," and went to leave his office. And he said, "Peter, one more thing." He was a man of few words, but he said, "One more thing, Peter. You've been involved in the work of the Leprosy Mission as a volunteer for a couple of years now. You're speaking in churches on Sundays," because I'd already I'd taken up the role as a volunteer speaking. "You're speaking in business and Rotary groups in the evening. It's really important now that you go and see our work. So next time I see you, why don't we talk about how we can get you out to visit some of our projects overseas?" And I left really excited about that prospect. But then the following Tuesday, the first day back after the long weekend, I had a phone call from my pastor, and he said, "Peter, I'm afraid I've got some really bad news for you. Rupert has collapsed in the church in Nottingham. He flew back from Northern Ireland this morning. He went straight to a church in to present on the work of the Leprosy Mission. He collapsed. He's on his way to hospital, but I've been told to expect the worst." And sure enough, Rupert didn't regain consciousness again. I was absolutely devastated by this news. He was a special guy, but the first thought that came into my mind was Rupert. The last thing that Rupert said to me was, "You need to visit these projects," and that became a prophetic word to me. It felt as if God had used Rupert to ensure that I took the next step on this journey with the Leprosy Mission. And so 6 months later, I got on an aeroplane. I flew to Kolkata. I visited the slums where Mother Teresa used to work. I met many families affected by leprosy. I then went into the hospital. I then went on a 7-hour overnight train journey to a place called Purulia, and visited what is one of the flagship Leprosy Mission hospitals in India. And there I met a lady called Dr. Joy Deeper. Dr. Joy Deeper and her husband pretty much run this hospital. Her husband, Pham, is the superintendent. And she told me that the two of them had not had a day away from the hospital together for 14 years because the hospital was so dependent on the two of them. And so if ever they needed some time out, they couldn't go away together, which was just unbelievably difficult for them. But she took me on a tour of the wards, and I saw the love that she had for the patients. I saw that she did not fear treating wounds. Patients with ulcers brought to the hospital with maggots in their feet, people that needed amputations because of gangrene, to save their lives. And Dr. Joy Deeper, who wasn't even qualified for surgery, if her husband wasn't there, on one occasion, a patient came in and she knew that it was either surgery at that moment or her life was in danger. She just said, I I prayed to God and said, "God help me, I have to do this." And she got on with an amputation, having only watched her husband do it in the past and never having done it herself. And I travelled back a week later, and I got to Dubai Airport, and I was looking around the airport at all of this wealth, and I suddenly remembered the people affected by leprosy, the elderly people with serious disabilities that I'd met in the leprosy colonies in the north of India. And I started to cry in the airport, and I was crying out to God, and I said, "I want to be Dr. Joy Deeper. I want my life to have more meaning. I want to be able to make the difference that Dr. Joy Deeper makes." And God, in His graceful way, gave me a bit of a tap and said, "Don't be so stupid, Peter. You're not a doctor. You don't live in India. That's not something that's possible. But what you can do is you can go back to England. You can talk even more passionately about what you've seen. You can raise money for people affected by leprosy, and you can support the likes of Dr. Joy Deeper in the work they're doing. People that are working sacrificially, they could earn so much more money in a non-Christian government hospital doing specialist work, but they choose to serve God. And I just thought, I'm going to commit my life to supporting these people. And doors continued to open. I recruited a replacement for Rupert. Um, That person was in position for 6 years, and during that time, the chairman and the new CEO met me, and the chairman said, "I've done my 6 years. I need to step down. Would you consider putting your name forward as the chairman of the Leprosy Mission?" I prayed. I didn't need to pray for long. I put my name forward. My purpose was not the job, and it was a good job, and I was earning very, very good money. But my purpose was what I did once I clocked off from my job as a managing director for a manufacturing company. It was about speaking on behalf of people affected by leprosy. And I became the line manager of the CEO, which felt a bit ridiculous at the time because he was brilliant at what he did and I was only a volunteer. But after he'd been in the role 6.5 years, he sat me down. He said, "I'm going to leave. My season here is finished. I'm going to take up a part-time role elsewhere in the Leprosy Mission, and I think you should pray about whether you're willing to put your name in the hat to be the next CEO of the Leprosy Mission England and Wales." And so at that point, I said to the previous chair, "I'm stepping down from the board. I need to push this door. I'm sure I'm not going to get it. I'm asking you to oversee this recruitment process to find God's person for this role, which I'm sure won't be me, but I feel like it's something that I need to do." And sure enough, I was successful in that interview. And 6.5 years ago, I sat in this chair for the first time, feeling totally unequipped. I've since been told something that I wish I'd been told at the time, that God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called.
The called, yeah, definitely, Peter.
Yeah.
That's absolutely incredible, and it goes to show that he just put that compassion and love into you from such a young age, and everything that you've been through and everything that you saw. And God knows the beginning from the end. He knows the plan that he had for you, and that he got you there. And I think it's incredible how you saw what the doctor was doing over there, and you wanted to do that role. But every single one of us has a purpose that God's given us, and every single one of us has a role that is just as important as the other one. We might not be physically out there with the people suffering with leprosy, but the things that we can do here really impact what is happening. We can support the people that are actually doing the physical things out there. We can be praying for them, and the role that you do at Leprosy Mission to raise that money, to raise that awareness, is just as important as what it is that they're doing out there, because without that money, without that fund, without that prayer, without that power, they wouldn't be able to be doing what they're doing. So it's incredible. Thank you for sharing that story. And this program is going really, really fast. That's why I'm so glad we've got another program that we're going to be doing together on this. But I think I want to go into the kind of the stigma around leprosy, but I think before we do that, it's important to understand what exactly leprosy is. So we do have a video that's going to show you and give you some more insights into it now.
Arshad has leprosy. That's right. Today, Arshad is living with leprosy. In fact, he's one of more than 200,000 people who are newly diagnosed each year. Arshad is feeling full of shame and sad, because people in his community believe he is contagious and that he is cursed. And worse, he's feeling worthless because most people in the world believe that leprosy hasn't existed since ancient times. Arshad would like you to know more about his disease. Leprosy is a mildly infectious condition caused by a bacteria related to tuberculosis. 95% of us are naturally immune to it, but it's more common in countries where poverty is rife and people's immune systems are not strong. If left untreated, leprosy causes damage to large nerves in the hands and feet, so the patient simply doesn't feel it when they hurt themselves. These wounds, and the ulcers they often cause, can ultimately lead to permanent disability, amputation, and despair. Leprosy is also one of the world's most stigmatizing diseases. Whole families see their education, job, and marriage prospects affected by discrimination and misunderstanding, often being denied their basic human rights. Even if aware that they have leprosy, patients fear being diagnosed, so fail to seek treatment, perpetuating a vicious cycle of disease, disability, and discrimination. 3 million people in the world are living with irreversible disabilities caused by late treatment of leprosy. But since 1982, an effective cure has been available. None of this has to happen. Arshad has been receiving support from the Leprosy Mission for a while now. We're a global charity working to diagnose, treat, and rehabilitate those who are suffering from this dreadful disease. After medication cured Arshad of leprosy, surgery helped him to use his hands and feet again. Now he's studying at one of our training centres so he can get a job and sustain himself. And thanks to awareness raising in his community, people now know that those affected by leprosy should not be outcasts and have the same rights as anyone else.
To see the work that the Leprosy Mission are doing to really raise awareness of it, but help those that are suffering with the leprosy, that they don't have to be alone in it and they don't have to feel isolated. Like Asha, you saw in that video, no one wants to speak to people with leprosy. People are scared. There's this stigma that comes around it that we're going to talk about in more detail. And Peter, that's really on your heart, isn't it? Because you mentioned earlier how you took a trip to India and yourself kind of had that stigma within you. You didn't really understand what leprosy was. Tell us the experience that you had and what happened that made you have this stigma, and what exactly happened when you was in India.
Yeah, so shortly after I got married, and I think God was in this as well, my wife had gone out. She'd gone to a Bruce Springsteen concert actually, and she left me at home. And I had a bit of a revelation that evening, and just decided that we should go around the world. And she arrived back. I was still wide awake, about 1:30 in the morning. She'd come back from London, and I said, we need to go around the world. We need to go traveling. We haven't got children. There's nothing to tie us down. If we don't do it now, we never will. And I think within a year from now, we need to have given everything up and we need to be on a plane. And literally 1 year later, in July 1993, we boarded a flight to Bombay, which is now known as Mumbai. We didn't book accommodation. Someone who I shouldn't have listened to said, "Starters, you mean to go on? You don't need to book accommodation because that's the way it's going to be for the rest of the trip." We really struggled to find somewhere, and eventually we found some really very basic accommodation, and we woke up the next morning to venture out in the streets of Mumbai. And literally we turned a corner and there was a homeless community living on the corner of a street, holding out their hands, begging. And I looked at their hands, and I don't know how I knew, I don't know where I'd heard of leprosy before, but I saw their damaged hands. I saw the terrible state that they were in. And I walked away. I crossed the road. I grabbed hold of my wife's hand, and we rushed across the road, jumping in front of the traffic to get away. And I became part of the stigma. I became part of the reason why people affected by leprosy feel shunned by society. But I never let go of that. I didn't see leprosy again on that trip, and that was the very first day of the trip, because that's the way God works, isn't it? He impacted me, but he never let me forget that moment. And so years and years later, when Rupert walked into my church, I knew that I connected the dots, that God had shown me something. He'd already taught me about the stigma and how I'd played a part in that, and he started to give me a route into this amazing work, and started to lay on my heart that I could be part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
Incredible. And I think, like I said earlier, it's amazing how sometimes God uses these situations and you now have a personal connection because you understand the other side of it, and now you've learnt about it and you've become aware of it and you know it in more detail, which has helped educate you and build your passion to help these people even more so. So I think that's why this program is important for us to understand, or not quite to get to the level that you have, because we might not have that experience to go out there and visit these people and physically help these people, but at least to understand what the stigma is and why that the stigma is wrong, why the things that we think about people with leprosy, why we feel the need to have to cross the road and all this kind of thing, to change our way of thinking, actually to love these people just like Jesus would love. Yeah. He went around healing many people of not only leprosy but many different diseases that back then they would have been shunned from their community too. They would have been isolated, and people would have been shocked that Jesus, a holy rabbi, would be going to these people. And there's some Bible verses that maybe we'll go into in the next program in regards to that. So can you just give us insight into what are some of the stigmas and discrimination that people with leprosy face, and actually give us the point of view of why that kind of thinking is incorrect?
Yeah. Absolutely. So first of all, there are laws around the world that discriminate against people affected by leprosy. It's a reason why you can divorce someone. It's a reason why you can refuse them for a job or throw them out of a job if they're newly diagnosed. 114 laws in India alone, but that's not just an issue in India, it's elsewhere. And I'm pleased to say that the Leprosy Mission is working to overturn those laws and has had some success. But actually, you can change laws, but what's really going to make a difference is changing hearts and minds. And sadly, leprosy, of course, is not a curse. But you will hear many people in the villages and the communities where leprosy exists describing it as exactly that. They must have done something wrong in a previous life because they have been cursed by the worst possible disease. And what they don't seem to understand, despite being told many times is that this disease is easily curable. Just a short, as you saw in the video with Arshad earlier, just a short series of multi-drug therapy. Within 24 hours, it's not contagious, and no, there will be no further damage in the body. But I do need to just say that when I say there'll be no further damage, if it's been a while before they take those first pills, they will have anesthetic feeling in their hands and feet and other parts of the body. So what that means is the first sign of leprosy is this pale patch on the skin. It's anesthetic, and you haven't got the feeling there. So you imagine you haven't got feeling in your hands, and you put your hands around a boiling pot as you cook for your family, and it starts to burn into your fingers, but you can't feel that. And the damage, by the time you smell burning, you realize it's your own flesh. The damage is already done. Imagine you step on a piece of glass in a field when you're working in a field, and you cut the bottom of your foot, but you don't know you've cut it. So you continue to walk in the soil there, and that gets infected. Ulcers develop. So the complications of leprosy can involve the need to amputate limbs, provide prosthetic limbs. That brings a need for physiotherapy. The diagnosis can bring the weight of discrimination, stigma into people's lives. So it's really important that we provide counselling where we can. And I've seen it. I've been to leprosy colonies, many leprosy colonies in countries across Africa and India, where people are sent away from the town to live separately, even though they have a disease and they're fully cured from that disease. They will not be given the basic rights that every single human being should expect. The discrimination against people affected by leprosy is so very real. And it's a bigger problem than the disease itself. We can cure the disease, but it's far more difficult to overcome the discrimination that comes crashing down on the lives of the person affected by leprosy once they've been diagnosed. It's heartbreaking.
It is
I just want to
heartbreaking.
add as well, sorry, you just did say about, we're called to love these people. I have obviously spent days, nights, sitting, praying with people affected by leprosy, putting my arm around them. And I've come to recognize something really spiritually special in the people I meet. It's almost as if God, well, we read in the Gospels, don't we, that Jesus went out of his way to be with people affected by leprosy. I don't think that's any different now. I believe that God is very evident, very present, and his love is almost overpowering, actually, in some of the projects that I've had the privilege of visiting. So I think I can only make the assumption that God's heart for people affected by leprosy is as strong today as it was when Jesus reached out and touched and healed people affected by leprosy.
Amen. And it's incredible to see that not only are you physically helping them, you're helping them understand and help their lives and help get the cure, but the spiritual side of it, I think, is so important. You're saving their life physically, but you're also saving their life spiritually, and you are being the hands and feet of Jesus. You are showing them the love of Jesus and that they're not alone, that they are unconditionally loved, that God sees them. And I think that's so nice that having the Leprosy Mission, having anybody going over there and giving them that attention, that time and that love can mean so much to them, especially when their community is shunned away from them and they're in isolation and they're feeling lonely. Just to have you go out there and to speak to them and just to look at them and for them to be seen must feel so special, and to then be able to teach them the gospel and teach them about Jesus and save their lives spiritually as well is absolutely incredible. So just want to say well done for the work that you're doing. I pray that God continues to bless yourself and the Leprosy Mission and all the work you're doing, and especially making awareness of it. And I've got a few more questions just before the end of this program to kind of understand it a bit more. So you mentioned that leprosy isn't contagious. Firstly, can you tell us, how is leprosy developed in the body? And if it's not contagious, why do people think it is? Can it get passed from person to person?
Yeah, I'm sorry if I said that it's not contagious, then I need to correct that. It is contagious, but 95% of the world's population are naturally immune to leprosy. And you or I could visit a hospital. We could spend time in the outpatients departments where there's patients coming in that haven't yet been diagnosed, so are contagious. You and I would not have to worry about contracting leprosy. You need to be living in poverty, suffering malnutrition for a long period of time. It's one of the most difficult diseases to catch. So one of the things that we do when a case has been diagnosed, we will go and visit the family and close neighbours, because they're the ones at risk. But people, if you came across with someone in the street who had leprosy and sat with them for 10 minutes, there's no chance of you contracting leprosy. What I think I said, and if I got this wrong, I apologise, is that once you start to take the drugs within 24 hours, you're not contagious. You need to, your body needs to be in a poor state. If you're going to catch leprosy, you have to really work really hard to catch leprosy, and without doubt, it's a disease of poverty. If you don't find poverty, you won't find leprosy, and poverty was rife across Western Europe until the early 1800s. And once we introduced good sanitation, good toilet facilities, then leprosy automatically was banished from Western Europe. So I guess you could say it's quite simple. If we solve poverty, we'll solve leprosy, but we know that God tells us in his word that the poor will always be with us.
Amen. Yeah, thank you for clearing that up. I think that is what you said within the 24-hour period. So, but just thank you for clearing that one up. And some people might also ask, is it hereditary? Can a mother or a father pass it on to their children within that poverty, or is that something that is possible to happen?
No, it's a bacteria, so it's something that you will breathe in. But as I say, it will only take advantage of a body that is already damaged in so many other ways. So no, it's not something that is genetic. It's not something that's passed on. It's something that you would catch.
And if someone has been cured from it, if they've had it and they've been cured from it, is it possible that it could come back again?
I think it's very, very rare. I actually don't know of anyone that's had leprosy for a second time, but there is a really awful complication. So it's called leprosy reaction. It normally occurs a couple of years after a patient has been cured. And what happens is the Leprosy Mission works with the patients, and so do government health organisations to build up their strength again. And of course, what happens naturally as a patient gets better is their immunity system wakes up and it gets stronger to fight not just leprosy but other diseases. And sometimes there is leprosy bacteria that has been killed by the drugs but lies in the bloodstream. But the immune system doesn't recognize that the leprosy bacteria is dead, so it starts to attack the leprosy bacteria. Of course, the leprosy bacteria doesn't exist, so what it does is the immunity system turns on its own body. And actually, I've been in wards where people are suffering with leprosy reaction, and it's worse than leprosy. There's people covered in boils and sores and rashes, and they're just in such pain. And the treatment, steroids, and you will have heard of the drug thalidomide as well, which has to be used under very careful circumstances, particularly with females. Is one of the ways of treating leprosy reaction, but it can take 1 or 2 years to clear up a leprosy reaction, and it's a time of real distress and pain for those patients. But the other thing that's worth mentioning is not just leprosy reaction. You might have been cured of the disease leprosy, but you could be living with the disabilities and the effects of the disease for life. So if you've lost your feeling in your hands and feet, if you've already got what's called clawed hands, that's where you can't straighten your fingers. There is an operation for that. Or drop foot, so you drag your foot along the ground. That is a perfect breeding ground for ulcers, and ulcers, you can be in hospital for 10 to 12 months to see a serious ulcer healed. And of course, if that doesn't happen, if they don't get that treatment, it can very quickly turn gangrenous, infected, and then you're talking about amputation, prosthetic limbs, and long-term disability. So that's why it's so important to find cases so early. And of course, that was a massive problem in the pandemic. You mentioned earlier that there's about 220,000 new cases a year. Of course, when hospitals were shut to anyone other than COVID patients, when doctors and nurses couldn't get out into the communities to inspect possible issues that were the early signs of leprosy. That meant that many tens of thousands of cases around the world went undiagnosed. And of course, we're finding those cases now, but the disabilities have already started to set in. So the pandemic has brought even more difficult circumstances into the communities where leprosy exists. So we feel that we're on a bit of catch up now to get out there and diagnose as many of those missing cases as we can.
Gosh, it's just so hard to imagine. I mean, we sit over here in the Western world, and if we got a cut on our hands or an ulcer comes up or anything, we just go to the doctor, and it's kind of easy for us, isn't it? But to hear the suffering that goes on in countries that are full of poverty, that it's not so easy for them just to go to a doctor, or they're not even aware that they're burning themselves and things like that. It's really hard to hear, but I think it's important that we are hearing this because, like I mentioned at the beginning of the programme, we hear the word leprosy and we don't really know much about it. We might have heard of the claw hands, or we might be able to picture what we've seen on TV, but to actually understand what the person goes through and the difficulty it is for them to be diagnosed. But the good side is that we hear there is a cure for it, and that there is people like yourselves going out there to help those get the cure, and that it means that they can have a life again afterwards. And I think in the next programme I'll go into more detail about the disabilities that can come with it, that the mental health that can come with it, the isolation, and that if you're disabled because of it, then it might be more difficult for you to get a job, and then that means housing and all sorts we're going to go into because we've only got 5 minutes left of the programme. But I just want to remind the viewers that if they want to find out more information about the Leprosy Mission, then they can go on to www.leprosymission.org.uk. That is their website, and you'll be able to find more information. You can also see that there is a number of different ways on social media that you can go and find out more about the Leprosy Mission if you want to contact them, if you want to support them, or you just want to find out more about leprosy. I've been on the website myself preparing for this programme, and there's so much information about its history, about the effects, the causes, about the ways it can be prevented as well. And maybe, Peter, just as we come towards the end of the programme, you can just touch on that. In what ways can we ensure that leprosy is prevented in these areas of poverty?
Yeah, well, I mentioned if you solve poverty, you solve leprosy, and of course that's not something we can do. But I think there's an increasing need to look at communities where there is a lack of good sanitation. So I visited a village in Sri Lanka in February of this year where child cases have gone through the roof following the pandemic. And we were exploring why are child cases going up? Should we spend a lot of money on research? But one day in the village told me the whole story. I visited 7 families where, and each of those families had a child case of leprosy, 2 3-year-old twins, which is devastating, and a father. Not one of those homes had their own toilet facilities, and they all had to walk a fair distance to get anything like clean water. So you can imagine children having to leave home and divert into the forest, to be able to go to the toilet before going to school, families shortcut in terms of getting that fresh water. If it's so difficult for them to get that fresh water, they will perhaps drink from pools of water that are not so good for them. So providing good sanitation and hygiene in those areas of real global poverty is really going to help. But let's not underestimate the scale of that task. It's huge, and it's one of the oldest diseases known to man, and it's clever. It's really sly. It lives really deep within the nerves. It can go undetected for 10-15 years. So when you first take on that bacteria, there'll be no symptoms, but it can start to develop, and at some point it will become contagious. So one day we hope we can find a diagnostic tool that will diagnose leprosy in those early stages, but we haven't got that yet. We can only spot it once you see the visible symptoms. But yeah, providing good hygiene, educating in schools for those early signs, so that when, if a child was to get that pale patch, not to cover it up, to be scared because of the discrimination, they'll come that way, but in fact to come forward for treatment, because if they get that early treatment, then there'll be no more problems for them for life. There are many things that we can do, and the other thing that we do is we work with government health experts who maybe they're training in a 3, 4, 5-year training course to be a doctor. They only spent a day learning about leprosy. And so when they see those signs, they're misdiagnosed. Very often people will go to faith healers rather than the experts and receive some cream that will be absolutely no use. And by the time someone recognises what this really is and pinpoints them towards a Leprosy Mission hospital or a Leprosy Mission field worker, we're a year down the line and they already have anaesthetic patches. So education, as education is a solution to so many problems, it most certainly is something that would help. people affected by leprosy.
Definitely. That's incredible, the fact that you could go with having it for 10 years and not even realising. So that I can see the importance of catching it early so that they can be treated, so that there's less damage, permanent damage that can be done, and especially in children. And as well, I think, like I say, we're going to mention in the second programme about how children and teenagers, when they're suffering with leprosy, that how even more so maybe that their mental health is impacted, because of course in the formative years of life, when you want to have them friends, when you're building your personality, to not have friendships and to be isolated and to be alone, I can understand how emotionally debilitating that is, as well as physically. But like I say, Peter, we are going to do a second programme on this, because there's so many more things that we can go into more detail about how people are affected, but also how we can help and what we can do about that. So Peter, I just want to say thank you for being part of this part of Impact on overcoming the stigma of leprosy, and thank you for giving us that foundation of understanding, firstly, your testimony and your background and how God is using you to do what you're doing, but also giving us insights into what leprosy is and how we can understand it more. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. I really hope that today has been an educational program for you. Maybe it's opened your eyes and helped you understand that leprosy is more than just an ancient disease from the Bible, that it is real and it exists today. And if we got rid of poverty, then we'd be able to get rid of leprosy. But we just pray for those who are suffering with poverty at the moment. We pray for those who are suffering with leprosy, that the right people will just see them and be able to diagnose them and be able to treat it early. Do make sure you tune in for our program that we're going to be doing, Overcoming the Stigma of Leprosy Part 2, because we're going to go into more detail. God bless you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time on Impact.